Hello, and welcome back to English Together, the business English podcast that helps you communicate with confidence and advance your career. I'm Paul.
And I'm Olivia. Paul, I need to tell you about something that happened in a coaching session last Tuesday that really drove home why today's topic is so critical. I was working with Jin, a finance analyst from South Korea who works at a consulting firm in London. Brilliant guy. MBA from a top school, incredibly sharp analytical mind.
I'm sensing there's a but coming here.
Exactly. Jin told me that in every single team meeting, he has valuable ideas and insights, but by the time there's a pause in the conversation, the moment has passed. Someone else has moved the discussion in a different direction, and his opportunity to contribute is gone. He said, Olivia, I sit in these meetings feeling invisible, and I know it's affecting how my managers perceive my leadership potential.
This is heartbreaking because I know this is not just Jin's problem. This is something we hear from non-native English speakers constantly. In many cultures, interrupting is considered deeply rude, so you're trained from childhood to wait for a pause, to wait for someone to finish completely before you speak. But in American and British business meetings, if you wait for that perfect pause, you'll wait forever.
Exactly right. And here's what native speakers understand instinctively. There's a massive difference between a rude interruption and a polite professional interruption. Native English speakers interrupt each other constantly in meetings, but they do it using specific language patterns that signal respect while still allowing them to enter the conversation.
And that's exactly what we're teaching you today. We call this framework the 8 power phrases for polite interruption. These are 8 specific phrases that will allow you to confidently enter any business conversation, contribute your ideas at the right moment, and be perceived as engaged and professional rather than rude or aggressive. By the end of this episode, you'll have the exact language and the strategic approach to never feel invisible in a meeting again. Let's dive in. All right, Olivia, let's start with what I call the entry phrases. These are the first 3 power phrases that allow you to enter a conversation that's already in progress. Power phrase number 1 is, can I jump in here quickly? This is probably the most versatile interruption phrase in business English.
I love this phrase because it does 3 things simultaneously. First, you're asking permission with can I, which shows respect. Second, you're using jump in, which is a casual, friendly phrase that native speakers use constantly. And third, you're adding quickly, which signals that you're not going to derail the entire conversation. You just have one point to add.
Let me paint you a picture of how this works in a real meeting scenario. Imagine you're in a budget planning meeting and 2 colleagues are going back and forth about marketing spend. They're talking over each other a bit, the energy is high, and you have crucial data about customer acquisition costs that would inform their entire discussion. You lean forward slightly, make eye contact, and say clearly, "Can I jump in here quickly? I actually have the Q3 customer acquisition data that might help us think through this decision."
Perfect. Notice that after you use the interruption phrase, you immediately give a reason why your interruption is valuable. You're not just interrupting to hear yourself talk. You're adding strategic value. Now, in an email context, you might use this phrase when replying to a thread where multiple people are debating something. You'd write, "Can I jump in here with a quick thought?" I wonder if we've considered the timeline implications of this approach.
And in informal office chat, maybe you're in the break room and 2 colleagues are discussing a client problem, you might say, "Hey, can I jump in for a second? I actually worked with that client last year and might have some context."
The common mistake learners make with this phrase is adding sorry at the beginning. They say, "Sorry, can I jump in here quickly?" And while that's not wrong, it diminishes your authority. You're not doing anything wrong by contributing to a meeting. That's literally your job. Save sorry for when you're actually interrupting something urgent or personal.
Brilliant point. Now, power phrase number 2 is, if I could just add something here. This one is slightly more formal than jump in, so it works beautifully in meetings with senior executives or clients where you want to project extra polish.
The magic of this phrase is in the structure. If I could just is what linguists call a conditional softener. You're not demanding, you're proposing. And the word just minimizes the imposition. You're being respectful of the conversation flow while still claiming your space.
Here's how this plays out in a client presentation.
The client is explaining their challenges, going into a lot of detail, and you realize they're describing a problem your company has solved before. You don't want to cut them off rudely, but you also don't want to wait 20 minutes. So you use a slight pause when they take a breath, and you say, "If I could just add something here, what you're describing is very similar to a challenge we addressed with another client in your industry. Would it be helpful if I shared how we approach that?"
Notice again, you're combining the interruption phrase with an immediate value statement and often a question that invites them to give you permission to continue.
Now, let's talk about power phrase number 3, which is, before we move on, I think we should consider. This is what I call a strategic redirect phrase. You're acknowledging that the conversation is about to shift topics, but you're making a case that there's something important that needs to be addressed first.
This phrase is essential when you're in a meeting where the discussion is moving too fast and you can see that people are about to make a decision without considering all the angles. Let me give you a concrete scenario. You're in a product development meeting and the team is getting excited about launching a new feature. They're talking about timelines, marketing angles, pricing, and you can feel the momentum building toward a decision. But you know there's a technical limitation that hasn't been mentioned that could derail everything.
So you use this power phrase. Before we move on, I think we should consider the API integration challenges. I spoke with the development team yesterday, and there are some technical dependencies that could push our timeline back by at least 6 weeks.
Perfect example. You're not being negative, you're not shooting down their excitement, but you're introducing critical information at a moment when the group can still actually use it. In an email context, you might be on a thread where people are converging toward a decision, and you'd write, "Before we move forward with this approach, I think we should consider the legal implications. I'd recommend we run this by the compliance team first."
And in a more informal setting, maybe a brainstorming session, you might say, "Before we move on to the next idea, I think we should consider whether this first concept actually solves the customer problem we identified. I'm not sure we fully tested that assumption."
The mistake learners make here is being too tentative. They say, maybe before we move on, possibly we could consider. All those qualifiers make you sound unsure. Use the phrase with confidence. If you think something needs to be considered, say so directly.
Now let's move to what I call the value phrases. These are interruption phrases that work by immediately establishing why your contribution matters. Power phrase number 4 is, "I have some data on this that might change our thinking." This is incredibly powerful because you're interrupting with evidence, not just opinion.
Right. And in business culture, especially American business culture, data trumps almost everything. When you signal that you have actual numbers or research, people will stop and listen. Imagine you're in a meeting about expanding into a new market, and people are making assumptions about customer demographics. You've actually researched this. So you say, "I have some data on this that might change our thinking. I pulled the market analysis yesterday, and the customer profile is actually quite different from what we're assuming."
In email, this might look like, "I have some data on this that might change our thinking. I've attached the benchmark report from our industry analyst. See especially page 12, which shows the competitive landscape is much more saturated than we thought."
And even in casual conversation, you might say, "Hey, I have some numbers on this that are pretty interesting. I was looking at our support tickets yesterday, and 70% of complaints are actually about one specific feature."
The common mistake here is saying you have data when you only have an opinion or anecdote. That destroys credibility. Only use this phrase when you genuinely have evidence, research, or concrete information.
Let's talk about power phrases 5 and 6, which are, "Can I offer a different perspective?" and "I'd like to build on what you just said." These are what I call diplomatic interruption phrases because they're perfect for situations where there's disagreement or sensitivity.
"Can I offer a different perspective?" is brilliant when you disagree with the direction of the conversation, but don't want to seem combative. You're framing your disagreement as additive rather than oppositional.
In a meeting where everyone seems to be agreeing on a strategy you think is flawed, you'd say, "Can I offer a different perspective? I'm wondering if we're potentially overlooking the seasonal nature of this market. Our data from last year showed a significant drop in engagement during Q4.
And I'd like to build on what you just said is perfect when you agree with someone but want to take their idea further. This makes you look collaborative and thoughtful. In a brainstorming meeting, someone proposes an idea and you see an opportunity to enhance it. So you say, I'd like to build on what Sarah just said about the customer portal. What if we also integrated a chatbot feature that could handle the most common queries automatically?
These phrases make you sound like a team player while still giving you the floor to speak.
Finally, let's cover power phrases 7 and 8, which are, let me make sure I understand before we continue, and this might be a good moment to pause and clarify. These are what I call control phrases because they allow you to slow down a conversation that's moving too fast or going in a confusing direction.
Let me make sure I understand before we continue is perfect when you're confused or when you suspect others are confused, but nobody wants to admit it. You're taking responsibility for the confusion, which makes it safe. In a technical meeting, you might say, let me make sure I understand before we continue. Are we saying that the integration has to be completed before the beta launch, or can those happen in parallel?
And this might be a good moment to pause and clarify works beautifully when the meeting has veered off track or when there are obvious misunderstandings happening. You're positioning yourself as the person who brings clarity and structure, which is a leadership quality.
These 8 phrases give you a complete toolkit for entering any conversation confidently and professionally.
Olivia, I think we need to address something that might be troubling some of our listeners right now, especially those from cultures where interrupting is considered disrespectful. You might be thinking, but in my culture, this would be incredibly rude. Why do I have to adapt to Western business norms?
That's such an important question, and I want to acknowledge that this can feel uncomfortable at first. Here's the cultural reality. In American and British business settings, meetings are viewed as collaborative problem-solving sessions, where everyone is expected to actively participate. Silence is not interpreted as respect or thoughtfulness. Silence is interpreted as disengagement, lack of ideas, or even lack of competence.
Exactly. And here's what's really crucial to understand. Native English speakers don't view these polite interruptions as interruptions at all. They view them as contributions. When you use phrases like, "Can I jump in here?" or "If I could just add something," native speakers hear this person is engaged, they're thinking critically, they have valuable input, and they respect the conversation enough to add to it thoughtfully.
Compare that to what native speakers think when you remain silent through an entire meeting. They don't think, oh, this person is being respectful and waiting their turn. They think, why isn't this person contributing? Do they not understand what we're discussing? Do they not care? Are they checked out?
And this has real career consequences. In performance reviews, managers consistently cite doesn't contribute in meetings or doesn't speak up with ideas as reasons why someone isn't ready for promotion. I've seen incredibly talented professionals get passed over for leadership roles specifically because they were too quiet in meetings.
Here's another layer to this. When you do finally speak after being silent for 30 minutes, there's now enormous pressure on that contribution. Everyone suddenly turns to look at you, wondering what you're going to say. But when you're contributing throughout the meeting using these polite interruption phrases, each contribution carries less weight, and there's less pressure. You're part of the natural flow of conversation.
So, this isn't about being rude or aggressive. This is about understanding the cultural code of professional English meetings and using specific language patterns that signal engagement and respect simultaneously. You can be both polite and assertive. That's the skill we're teaching today.
Olivia, this conversation is reminding me so much of a client I worked with about 18 months ago. Her name was Priya, and she was a project manager from India working at a pharmaceutical company in Boston. She'd been with the company for almost 3 years, consistently received good performance reviews for her technical work, but she'd applied for a senior project manager role twice and been rejected both times.
Let me guess. The feedback was about executive presence or communication skills.
Exactly. Her manager finally told her directly, Priya, you're incredibly competent, but in leadership meetings, you're invisible. We need senior project managers who can hold their own in rooms with VPs and directors. And right now, you're not demonstrating that capability. Priya was devastated. She told me, Paul, I'm in those meetings, I'm listening, I'm taking notes, I'm thinking about everything being discussed. Why is that not enough?
Because in American business culture, thinking is not enough. You have to demonstrate that you're thinking by contributing verbally.
Exactly what I told her. So we spent 2 months specifically working on polite interruption techniques. We practiced the 8 power phrases we're teaching today. We role-played difficult meeting scenarios. At first, Priya felt like she was being pushy and aggressive. She said, this isn't who I am. I don't want to be the person who talks over everyone.
And what did you tell her?
I told her, you're not talking over anyone. You're using the exact same language patterns that every native English speaker in your meetings is using. You just weren't aware of the pattern. We recorded her practicing these phrases, and she listened back. She started to hear how polite and professional they actually sounded.
What happened?
Within 3 months, her entire reputation in the company transformed. Her manager specifically commented in her next review, Priya has really stepped up as a vocal leader in cross-functional meetings. And here's the incredible part. 6 months after we started working together, when the next senior project manager role opened up, Priya was the first person they offered it to. Same person, same technical skills, but completely different professional presence.
That's the power of understanding how to interrupt politely in English business culture.
All right, everyone, we're now going to do something really important. We're going to practice these power phrases out loud, because knowing them intellectually is not the same as being able to use them smoothly and confidently in a real meeting.
Olivia and I are going to give you 3 complete interruption phrases, and your job is to pause the podcast after each one and repeat it out loud with confidence and clarity.
This might feel awkward if you're listening in public, but I promise you, this kind of deliberate practice is how you build fluency. You need muscle memory. You need these phrases to feel natural in your mouth so that in a high-pressure meeting moment, they come out smoothly. Ready? Here's phrase number 1. Listen to my tone and rhythm, then pause and repeat. Can I jump in here quickly? I actually have some data on customer preferences that might help us think through this decision.
Good. Notice the confidence in your voice. You're not apologizing. You're contributing. Here's phrase number 2. Before we move on, I think we should consider the budget implications. I'm concerned we might be underestimating the implementation costs here.
Excellent. You're being thoughtful and strategic. Here's phrase number 3. If I could just add something here, what you're describing is very similar to a project we completed last quarter. Would it be helpful if I shared what we learned from that experience?
Perfect. Now, if you want more practice like this, if you want detailed scripts for different meeting scenarios, and if you want to build true confidence with professional interruption techniques, we've created something specifically for you.
We've put together a free downloadable guide called the Meeting Confidence Toolkit. It includes all 8 power phrases we covered today, but with 15 different meeting scenarios, complete scripts you can adopt, and a confidence-building practice plan that takes just 10 minutes a day.
You can download it completely free right now by going to EnglishTogether.com/meeting. That's EnglishTogether.com/meeting. Just enter your email address and we'll send you the complete toolkit immediately.
And I want to tell you, this toolkit has genuinely changed careers. We get messages every week from listeners who say, I used these phrases in a board meeting and finally felt like I belonged there. Or, my manager noticed I'm contributing more strategically.
These aren't just phrases. This is the blueprint for how native English speakers navigate professional meetings. And once you understand the pattern, you can adapt it to any situation.
So go grab that free toolkit right now.
EnglishTogether.com/meeting. All right, let's bring everything together with a complete recap of the 8 power phrases for polite interruption that will transform how you show up in business meetings.
Phrases 1, 2, and 3 are your entry phrases. Can I jump in here quickly? For versatile, friendly interruption. If I could just add something here, for more formal settings with executives or clients. And before we move on, I think we should consider the budget implications for strategic redirection when the conversation is moving too fast.
Phrase number 4 is your value phrase. I have some data on this that might change our thinking. Use this when you're interrupting with evidence, not just opinion.
Phrases 5 and 6 are your diplomatic phrases. Can I offer a different perspective when you disagree but want to stay collaborative? And I'd like to build on what you just said when you're enhancing someone else's idea.
And phrases 7 and 8 are your control phrases. Let me make sure I understand before we continue, when you need clarity. And this might be a good moment to pause and clarify when the meeting needs structure.
If you start using even 3 or 4 of these phrases in your meetings this week, you will immediately be perceived as more engaged, more confident, and more ready for leadership.
Remember, polite interruption is not rude, it's professional participation. Thanks so much for listening to English Together. Grab your free meeting confidence toolkit at EnglishTogether.com/meeting.
And we'll see you next time. Keep practicing, keep growing, and keep speaking English together.